This next gentleman, I'm thrilled to be able to call a friend. And Chris, we have already checked ourselves for foreign substances three times to make sure that this conversation is on the up and up. Yeah. One of the all-time greats, 28-time Emmy Award winner and Baseball Hall of Famer, Bob Costas. How are you, sir?
Hey, Rich. How are you?
I'm conflicted, Bob. I'm very conflicted. Yes, I am.
What can I do to help, Rich?
The pitchers, using all of this gunk this year, and many of them bringing this on themselves. But I don't like seeing Hall of Fame pitchers to be, pulling their pants open, and managers like Girardi screaming at the other dugout, "Come on out, let's go fight." I mean, this is not what baseball should be, Bob. Honestly,
I think in the case of Girardi, Scherzer, some of this is gamesmanship and an unintended consequence of baseball trying to crack down on the excessive use of these various substances, try to get in Max Scherzer's head, try to disrupt whatever rhythm he's got going. And I guess they could have anticipated that. My understanding was that unless there was something so flagrant that it was happening right in front of everybody in the middle of an inning, that what umpires have been instructed to do is to randomly check pitchers as they come off the mound, so it would not delay the game. It's the end of a half inning, or perhaps in a circumstance where a pitcher has been removed and there's a break while the other pitcher comes out of the bullpen, then you check whomever. Not every time, but randomly, enough like traffic stops with radar, enough to at least curtail those who are speeding in this case, or those who are cheating. I didn't think it was intended to start a parade of checking in the middle of innings or allow managers to use it as a form of gamesmanship, which is apparently what happened. And then Sergio Romo turned it into a form of burlesque, which was amusing.
He did. I mean, like he went Steve Lyons on us, Bob. Like taking
right. I mean, all the Lions didn't know what he was doing.
Right.
He didn't realize what he was doing until it was too late.
But I mean, Manfred can't want to see pitchers taking their pants down. Like, I mean, this is ridiculous. It really.
I think there's universal agreement that we don't want pitchers dropping trow, or for that matter, shortstops or right fielders dropping trow in full view of everybody.
So, what's the fix, Bob? I have an idea. I'd love to hear what your idea is, because clearly the first 48 hours. And look, you can't also sit here and say somebody who's going to the Hall of Fame is above getting checked out. When I had Rod Carew on last week, and he said he told Gaylord Perry all the time, "You throw whatever you want, I'll just hit the dry side of the baseball." So, what is the fix in your mind, Bob Costas?
It seems to me that what they have to do is identify an acceptable substance or one or two acceptable substances, because it is necessary for pitchers to get a grip on the ball. There are different weather conditions, especially when it's cold. You can recall this. It seems quaint. I can recall saying it as a broadcaster. The umpires will tell us before a game, let's say in April or a postseason game in October, in a cold weather site, you're allowed to go to your mouth on the mound, which has been outlawed in most circumstances because the pitchers need something to get a grip on the baseball, not just for their effectiveness, but to prevent a pitch from getting away at 90-plus miles an hour and buzzing somebody upstairs. So you don't want that to happen. In fact, Scherzer made that point after the game last night. But they can identify, it would seem to me, one or two acceptable substances available in every clubhouse and dugout. And since a rosin bag has been at the back of the mound since the beginning of time, that indicates that baseball understands that you need something to help with the grip. Perhaps they can come up with something, either in addition to or in place of the rosin bag, that would be placed on the downside of the mound behind the pitcher and could be used, but it's MLB approved. And anything other than that, if you're found with any substance other than that, no matter what your lame, the dog ate my homework excuse is, you're suspended. And it doesn't matter if you're a Cy Young winner or the last guy out of the bullpen.
The question is why hasn't that happened? I mean,
I have
Manfred's smart enough. Everyone's smart enough. Everyone knows that what we just saw from DeGrom getting checked, even though his spin rates are lower than most despite his incredible talent, and Scherzer getting checked 3 times. It took one, full day on Tuesday with many teams off Monday, one full day for a manager to come across as looking like he's using it to mess with a pitcher's head. I mean, why are we going through what you referred to? It is literal, figurative burlesque. Why are we doing this? What's going on?
Perhaps they didn't institute this with enough foresight. We know a lot of pitchers said, look, let's institute this next year. But baseball is concerned. I haven't checked the numbers in the last week or so, but at one point, a couple of months into the season, the overall MLB average was the lowest since 1968, which prompted the lowering of the mound when MLB overall hit 237, pardon me, and then later, a couple of years later, the American League goes to the DH. And if you take 1968 out of the mix, then the overall MLB batting average a couple months into this season was the lowest in modern history, lowest since the 1880s or something like that. So maybe they felt we couldn't wait until 2022. This is a crisis, and we got to get a handle on it as soon as we can.
And that was brought on maybe in the fact that they decided to not deal with the issue in this particular offseason. And we did, see spider tack and all. I mean, it's crazy, Bob. Right? I mean, like, what was the craziest substance you ever heard was being used in the last, decades of this sport, Bob?
Petroleum jelly. Other forms of lubricant which are designed for more intimate settings than a stadium filled with people, et cetera, et cetera.
Bob Costas here on the Rich Eisen Show. So are we just going to continue to see this? I mean, are you hearing anything about what's being discussed? I mean, what do you think?
Rich, I think this is the key difference. Guys have always cheated, looked for an edge. Some of it we looked on almost benignly, like it's interesting gamesmanship. Pardon me. Elston Howard of the Yankees back in the 60s used to say that he would nick a baseball on his shin guard before throwing it back to Whitey Ford. And that one little nick allowed Whitey to make the baseball do some things that he otherwise couldn't make it do. Gaylord Perry, we all know, and Gaylord went through an elaborate series of maneuvers, touching the bill of his cap, touching his belt, touching his jersey, the back of his hair, all those things, if only to put the fear of it in the batter's mind and to offer too many possibilities for the umpires to crack down on him, or Don Sutton or others. Okay, we knew it existed, but the general impression was that it's a handful of guys who are doing this effectively. Now, with the biomechanics that have come into play, with the way pitchers train, with the emphasis on velocity and spin rate, high-tech coaching, then supplemented by these various substances, it's across the board. Not everybody may be as effective, but a huge percentage, the consensus is a huge percentage of pitchers, from middling guys all the way up to future Hall of Famers, are using this to gain a further advantage. So you have, instead of a few little wink-wink outliers, the Gaylord Perrys of the world, you've got an epidemic throughout the sport, and it's affecting the appeal of the sport as an entertainment product. When you look back at the steroid era, it was wrong. It poisoned the record books, but you could make a case that it actually made baseball more entertaining for a period of time. People responded to it. They may feel differently about it through the rearview mirror, but in the here and now, they responded more or less favorably to it. No fans respond favorably to this form of baseball, where action is suppressed, where run scoring is suppressed, where the strikeout rate in Major League Baseball, Rich, the overall strikeout rate is equal to Nolan Ryan's career strikeout rate. Nolan Ryan struck out about 25% of the batters he faced over his quarter-century career. That's the average strikeout rate in Major League Baseball now, all pitchers combined. This is not entertaining.
Yeah, I was, and you tack it on to the Rays doing like what a lot of teams are doing as well, which is start the opener, not a starter, start the opener, then get yourself to a fifth inning where you might have one lead and then bring in one 100-mile-an-hour thrower after another out of the pen and get the right mix of exit velocity and spin rate and shifting and get yourself to the World Series. And I run that. I said that's akin to having the first 90 scripted in the NFL. It just comes across as not enough heart and soul and feel and gut, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And add on the spider tack after the Apple Watch, after the Theragun, after all of that, and it's just what can be done, Bob? I guess that's why I said at the very beginning I'm conflicted, because I love this sport so much, and I know that it's yours to love as well. So what do you think?
What you just mentioned prompts another point, which is implied. It used to be that a fastball above 90 was noteworthy. Now, like 91, 92 is the average big league fastball. And we know that a lot of guys, some of them starters and certainly bullpen guys who come out and just let the throttle out for an inning or a few batters, 95 plus is commonplace. So if you combine that with additional spin rate on that pitch and then additional spin rate on a hard-breaking slider, big league hitters are overmatched in many circumstances. The game has a certain balance. And when that balance has gotten out of whack in the past, adjustments have been made. Baseball's very slow to make these adjustments. Other sports tend to do it more quickly. And baseball, because it has its history that you don't want to mess with, et cetera, maybe it's a good thing that they're generally slow to change things. But we can see now that it is out of whack again. It was out of whack in the late 60s in favor of the pitchers. It was way out of whack in the 90s and the early 2000s because of steroids and other factors in favor of the hitters. And now it's back out of whack in favor of the pitchers again. And they have to recalibrate this most urgently because it affects the business. It affects baseball as an entertainment product. But it also affects competitive balance and whatever is left of generational comparisons, which are difficult to begin with, but whatever is left of that, which is part of the enjoyment of baseball, if the conditions are so starkly different from one decade to the next, then some of that generational comparison goes away.
Bob Costas here on the Rich Eisen Show. In the few minutes we have left, then Bob, let's stroll down memory lane. Let's get back to some other times here. 37 years ago today, where were you, Bob Costas?
I was at Wrigley Field in Chicago, and it didn't even occur to me that this is yet another anniversary of the so-called Sandberg game until I heard someone mention it on the air this morning. And for those too young to remember it, the key thing here is that the Saturday afternoon game of the week in the 70s, 80s, really to the cusp of the 90s, was a whole different thing than just a random baseball game that happens to be on Saturday afternoons now. That was the only national telecast of the entire week in baseball. In 1984, the cable superstations that carried the Braves and the Cubs were in their infancy. So if you were in a non-major league city, that was your one chance to see Fernando Valenzuela face Johnny Bench or whatever it may have been. And even if you did live in a major league city, most of those cities only televised maybe 25 or 30 road games for an entire year. It was an entirely different landscape. The Saturday afternoon game of the week sometimes got ratings of 9 and 10, ratings equal to primetime hit television shows. So Tony Kubek and I find ourselves at Wrigley Field in Chicago. It's the Cardinals against the Cubs, so it's classic. You always see some red shirts in the stands at Wrigley and some blue Cub shirts and hats at Busch Stadium. It's a beautiful Saturday afternoon. The Cardinals jump in front 9-3. The Cubs come battling back. It's 9-8 when Ryne Sandberg comes up in the bottom of the ninth to face Bruce Sutter. And to show you how different the game was, Sutter's been in the game for 2 innings already. He's trying to close it out. Sandberg homers into the left center field bleachers to tie the game at 9-9. They go to the 10th. Willie McGee doubles home a run. At that point, Willie McGee is hit for the cycle. He later scores what appears to be an insurance run. The score is 11-9. 2 outs, nobody on. Bob Dernier, the leadoff man, walks on a 3-2 pitch, a disputed 3-2 pitch. Up comes Sandberg again. Suter's still on the mound. Sandberg hits the ball to almost exactly the same place. Looked like the same fan could have caught them both. Now the game is tied 11-11. The place is going berserk, and eventually the Cubs win the game in 11 innings, 12-11. the game to this day is still as the Sandberg game. It's a regular season game that has a title. The only other one I can think of is the Pine Tar game, where George Brett briefly had his home run disallowed at Yankee Stadium and went berserk, memorably berserk, as he came charging out of the dugout. But that could never happen today, which is not a knock on modern baseball. But there's so much baseball available all the time. I'm sure there have been games just as wild and just in their own place as memorable as what happened on June 23rd, 1984. But it did not reach the entire country in quite the same way. The movie The Natural had come out only a month or two before, and at some point in the broadcast, after Sandberg had hit his second home run, I said, we must be looking at the real Roy Hobbs here. Sandberg's The Natural. And at that point, and Sandberg to this day says that was the turning point of his career. It marked him as an MVP candidate. He did win the MVP. The Cubs, who were forlorn forever, as they usually are, emerged as a contender. They came within one win of making it to the World Series. And that one game stands out as the signature of a Hall of Fame career and the signature of the Cubs' rebirth. 37
years ago today. Amazing. And before I do let you go, and I know we've chatted a while, but I would be remiss if I did not ask you about Marv Albert tonight.
Yes.
Making his first of final, what I hope is 7 calls in the Eastern Conference Finals. I grew up in New York City watching Marv on WNBC locally in New York, right, as well as him going national and calling Knicks and Rangers games on the radio as well. It's part of the reason why I sit in this chair, and I've told him that. What are your recollections? First time you met him? Anything you want to say about him as he's embarking on his final assignment starting tonight?
Every kid in New York, whoever shot baskets in a gym or in a schoolyard without a net on the rusty rim.
Uh-oh. We lost him. And Bob is probably sitting there somewhere in New York City, just still talking. Bob, are you there, Bob? You're back on?
Yes, I am. And you ever have this feeling? Usually it happens with a cell phone, not a landline. Yes. It drops out, but you don't know it. And so you're just listening to yourself make whatever wonderful point you think you're making. And then there's silence on the other end of the line. And for the first few seconds, you think, what I said was so stunning that he or she has to gather themselves before responding. And then you realize, no, like someone just ranting in a bus terminal, you've been talking to no one in particular.
I'm sure it was great. That's why I wanted to call back and hear it. You were saying we lost you when I asked you about Marv, your thoughts on Marv, and you were saying anybody who's playing on a basketball in New York City, and then poof, you were gone. So I'll give you the floor again with what you were saying with Marv beginning his final assignment tonight.
As great and iconic as Marv has been on national television, and that alone more than qualifies him for every Hall of Fame for which he is eligible, to fully appreciate the whole arc of Marv Albert's career, you have to have heard him on the radio doing the Rangers and especially the Knicks. No disrespect to hockey, but the Rangers didn't win the Stanley Cup until 1994. The Knicks, when Marv was their young radio voice, not only won 2 championships in the early 70s, they were one of the most memorable and appealing teams in NBA history because of the unselfish way in which they moved the ball, always looking for the open man. And some announcers have a style that matches the team with which they're associated. If we want to go way back, Ray Scott called many of the most memorable Green Bay Packer games. Ray Scott's style on CBS was so minimalist, so meat and potatoes, that the way he sounded matched the image of Vince Lombardi's Green Bay Packers. The way Marv Albert sounded on the radio matched the way the Knicks played. The quick, crisp, staccato calls as they crisply moved the ball around the court. Ideally, radio, which meant more generations ago than it does now because people relied on it more for information and also for sports. It was just more central than it is now. Radio, ideally, is the theater of the mind. If you knew the Knicks roster and you listened to Marv Albert call a game, you didn't just know who made the basket or who grabbed the rebound. You knew down to the foot where the ball was on the court. You could visualize every moment of the game. His calls elevated. The way Vin Scully's calls or Jack Buck's calls elevated big moments for the Dodgers or the Cardinals. Marv Albert's calls are inseparable from that era of Knick basketball. Every kid who ever shot a basket in a gym or on a schoolyard someplace, every kid heard Marv Albert, every New York kid. And there were many cries of yes when one out of every 6 or 7 shots I launched somehow found the bottom of the net.
Yes, and it counts and all of that. And then, of course, you were part of the broadcast team when NBC Sports got the NBA and, you know, John Tesh's round ball rock was brought you into a broadcast, hearing your voice first, and then it would be Marv calling the game. And what was it like to be part of that era? We saw, obviously, part of it in the Last Dance documentary, but just thinking about that again as Marv is wrapping up this storied play-by-play career. It include, you know, Super Bowls and things of that nature as well on the radio. But I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that, Bob.
No disrespect to any others who have covered the NBA. CBS with Dick Stockton and company did a very good job during the Bird and Magic era. Mike Breen is literally a Hall of Fame basketball announcer on ESPN and ABC, and they've got a good thing going with Jackson and Van Gundy. And, of course, TNT, the best studio show in the history of television sports, is Ernie Johnson, Shaq, Kenny, and Barkley on TNT. And Marv has been among those doing the play-by-play on TNT. So all that stuff is excellent. But I think the combination of the way the games were produced on NBC during that era in the 90s, the fact that it was the Michael Jordan Chicago Bulls era, it also encompassed the Dream Team in '92 in Barcelona. You got Marv calling the games. The games were brilliantly produced and directed. John Tesh's round ball rock still resonates with people. We had dramatic openings, especially for the games in the finals, that brought the games on the air, that not only kind of in 2 minutes summed up the narrative of where the series stood, but got you ready for the game. I have people tell me to this day, I guess they show up on YouTube, that they still get goosebumps watching some of that stuff. And then you hear Marv's voice, which is inseparable from the NBA of the 90s. I don't think that you can cover a league or a sport any better than NBC did with the NBA in the 90s.
Yeah, and then just you know, Marv's voice, you know, Michael Jordan again, you know, as he's giving the shrug going up the court, you know, I mean, in the old Chicago stadium. I'm getting goosebumps just talking to you about it, Bob.
You know, sometimes there are some great broadcast calls where if you read a transcript, you say, wow, that's incredible. The transcript of Vin Scully's call of the entire ninth inning of Sandy Koufax's perfect game in 1965 is poetry. But then there are things which, if 99% of announcers said it, it would just be okay. But because it was someone like Marv Albert in that distinctive style saying it, that's what separated it. Oh, a spectacular move by Michael Jordan. Almost any announcer could say those words. But the way Marv Albert said them, that's what separated it from everybody else. If I had said those exact words, it would have been okay. Marv said it. It was, whoa.
Perfect, Bob. Thanks for the call. Thanks for the call back. Thanks for all that. You take care, bud. Thanks, man. That's Bob Costas. Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.